You're 22 years old, freezing in a metal box, watching through a fogged periscope as 12 German tanks crawl toward your position like steel predators. Your finger hovers over the trigger of a gun that could change everything. But here's the catch: you have no permission to fire. 0. Your orders are crystal clear: observe and report. Nothing more. This was the reality facing Private First Class Ray Thompson on December 19, 1944, in the frozen forests of Belgium. Through that scratched piece of glass, he could see death approaching, not just for him, but for thousands of American soldiers trapped in what would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. The German column wasn't just any patrol. Leading the pack was a Tiger I tank, a 57-ton monster capable of punching through nearly anything the Americans had. Behind it, 3 Panzer IV tanks moved in perfect formation, followed by half-tracks packed with infantry and supply vehicles that would fuel a devastating breakthrough. Thompson knew exactly where they were headed: straight toward the Noville crossroads. If those tanks reached that intersection, they would cut off the lifeline to the 101st Airborne Division, already surrounded and fighting for survival in Bastogne. Tens of thousands of American paratroopers would be left to die in the snow. But Ray Thompson had a problem that went beyond enemy firepower. The military doesn't reward cowboys. It rewards discipline, following orders, waiting for the green light from command. One wrong shot could mean court-martial. One unauthorized engagement could end his career, maybe his life. Yet as Thompson watched that methodical German advance, calculating distance, wind speed and firing angles in his engineering-trained mind, he realized something terrifying. Waiting for permission wasn't caution anymore. It was suicide. The radio crackled with static. No contact with command. No orders coming through. Just silence, and the steady approach of German steel that would soon disappear into the forest where they could scatter and become unstoppable. Thompson's hands trembled not from fear, but from the cold that seeped through every rivet of his M10 Wolverine tank destroyer. His breath fogged in short bursts as he made a calculation that would either save thousands of lives or destroy his own future. In that frozen moment, staring at 12 enemy vehicles that represented the difference between American victory and catastrophe, Ray Thompson made a decision that would rewrite military doctrine forever. He was about to prove that sometimes, the greatest act of discipline is knowing exactly when to break the rules. To understand why Thompson's decision was so extraordinary, you need to understand the iron grip of military protocol in December 1944. The American military machine didn't run on individual heroics. It ran on coordination, communication, and absolute obedience to the chain of command. 3 days before Thompson faced his impossible choice, the entire 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion had received their marching orders in a drafty Belgian farmhouse. The message was brutally simple: no one fires without confirmation from command. I don't care what you see. I don't care how close they are. We do not give away our position unless ordered. This wasn't military bureaucracy run amok. These rules existed because the Battle of the Bulge had turned into absolute chaos. On December 16, German forces had smashed through American lines with over 200,000 men and more than 1,000 tanks in a surprise offensive that caught Allied command completely off guard. American units were scattered, communication lines severed, and nobody knew where anyone else was positioned. In that fog of war, the deadliest enemy wasn't always wearing a German uniform, it was friendly fire. American crews were accidentally targeting other American units because they couldn't tell friend from foe. The psychological pressure was crushing. Tank destroyer crews like Thompson's were positioned as the last line of defense, but they were operating blind. They could see enemy movement, count enemy vehicles, plot firing solutions, but they couldn't act. They had to watch and wait while German forces maneuvered into positions where they could cause maximum damage. This created a unique form of torture for men trained to fight. Imagine being a surgeon forced to watch a patient bleed out while waiting for permission to operate. That's what these gunners faced every day: the technical ability to stop enemy advances, but the legal prohibition from using it. The rules made sense from a strategic perspective. Uncoordinated fire could reveal American positions to enemy artillery observers. A single unauthorized shot could bring down devastating counter-battery fire that would wipe out entire crews. Worse, it could trigger a cascade of confusion where American units began targeting each other in the smoke and chaos. But the rules also created a psychological paradox. The men most capable of reading battlefield situations, experienced gunners with tactical training, were the ones forbidden from acting on their expertise. They became highly trained observers, reduced to taking notes while enemy forces prepared to slaughter their fellow Americans. Thompson understood this tension better than most. His engineering background made him acutely aware of cause and effect. of systems and consequences. He could calculate the risk of unauthorized fire, court-martial, disgrace, possible execution for disobeying direct orders in combat. But he could also calculate the cost of inaction. Every minute those German tanks moved closer to Noville represented hundreds, maybe thousands of American lives. The 101st Airborne was already surrounded in Bastogne, cut off from supplies and reinforcements. If the Noville road fell, those paratroopers would face annihilation. The military had taught Thompson to be a precision instrument, capable of devastating accuracy at long range. But it had also taught him to be a passive instrument, activated only by orders from above. The system assumed that individual soldiers, no matter how skilled, couldn't see the big picture. What the system didn't account for was a soldier who could see the big picture better than his commanders, a gunner whose analytical mind could process tactical information faster than radio communications could deliver orders. Thompson wasn't just following protocol. He was calculating whether following protocol would lead to strategic disaster. As he watched that German column advance through his periscope, Thompson faced the ultimate test of military discipline, knowing when blind obedience becomes a betrayal of the mission itself. Growing up in western Kansas, where the horizon stretched endlessly in every direction and the nearest neighbor lived 3 miles away, Thompson learned to see the world through numbers and angles. His father Charles ran a small engine repair shop in a town so small it barely had a name. His mother Anna taught 7th grade mathematics at the local school, where Ray spent countless afternoons working through geometry problems while his classmates played outside. But Ray wasn't antisocial, he was analytical. While other kids built tree forts, Ray constructed elaborate pulley systems to lift materials more efficiently. When his friends played with slingshots, Ray designed counterweight mechanisms to achieve maximum range and accuracy. Even as a child, he understood that precision mattered more than power. The Kansas prairie taught Thompson something that would save his life in Belgium: how to calculate distance by observation alone. In a landscape where the nearest tree might be 5 miles away, you learn to judge space by shadow length, by the size relationship between objects, by the way heat shimmer affected visibility. These weren't academic exercises, they were survival skills in a place where being lost meant death. Thompson's mathematical mind made him different from other farm kids, but it also made him invaluable. Local farmers would bring him broken equipment not because he was the strongest mechanic, but because he could diagnose problems other people missed. He saw patterns in mechanical failure, understood the geometric relationships that made engines work or fail. When America entered World War II, Ray Thompson didn't enlist out of patriotic fever or adventure-seeking. He joined the Army because they offered engineering training, steady pay, and a chance to use his mathematical abilities in ways that rural Kansas never could. The military promised to teach him precision gunnery, ballistics calculation, and advanced mechanical systems. What Thompson found in basic training was that his analytical approach to problems made him an exceptional soldier, but not necessarily a popular one. While other recruits bonded over shared hardships and crude humor, Thompson carried a small spiral notebook where he recorded everything: firing patterns, equipment maintenance schedules, even the timing of meal deliveries. His instructors noticed something unusual about the quiet Kansas farm kid. Thompson didn't just learn gunnery techniques. He understood the mathematical principles behind them. He could calculate windage corrections in his head, estimate range by target size relationships, and predict equipment failure patterns before they became critical. By the time Thompson shipped out to Europe, he had developed an almost supernatural ability to read mechanical systems and battlefield geometry. But he had also developed something more dangerous: an independent analytical mind that questioned whether official procedures were always optimal. Thompson's first combat experience in the Norman hedgerows shattered any romantic notions about warfare. He watched his friend Jimmy Delgado burn alive when a Panzer shell caught their half-track in a roadside ditch. Another friend, Frank Murray, was vaporized by a mine outside St. Lo. These weren't glorious deaths, they were mathematical equations solved by German efficiency. Instead of breaking Thompson's spirit, these losses focused his analytical mind. He began studying German tactical doctrine with the same intensity he had once applied to broken tractor engines. Every enemy vehicle he encountered went into his notebook: armor thickness, blind spots, mechanical vulnerabilities, crew behavior patterns. Other soldiers called Thompson the quiet clock, because when he did speak, his observations were precise, timed, and usually accurate down to the second. But what his fellow soldiers didn't fully understand was that Thompson wasn't just observing, he was learning to predict. Thompson discovered that German tank crews followed predictable patterns. They moved in standard formations, paused at standard intervals, and responded to threats in ways that their training manuals dictated. If you understood the patterns, you could anticipate their movements like predicting the path of a mechanical gear system. This analytical approach made Thompson an excellent gunner, but it also made him something more dangerous. A tactical thinker who could see battlefield situations as solvable problems rather than chaotic violence. His engineering mind transformed warfare from random destruction into calculable geometry. By December 1944, Thompson had evolved into something the military hadn't planned to create: a precision instrument with an independent mind. He had all the technical skills of an exceptional gunner, but also the analytical capability to make strategic decisions that his commanders couldn't see. That combination of technical excellence and independent thinking would soon make him either a hero or a criminal, depending on whether his unauthorized calculations proved correct. While other soldiers saw chaos, Ray Thompson saw patterns. Where others saw random violence, he saw predictable systems operating according to discoverable rules. This wasn't natural talent. It was methodical study that transformed him from a Kansas farm kid into something approaching a tactical genius. Thompson's spiral notebook became his secret weapon. Every German vehicle encounter, every enemy movement pattern, every tactical decision went into those pages with mathematical precision. He sketched armor profiles from memory, noted crew behavior patterns, and recorded the timing of German tactical responses to different types of Allied pressure. What emerged from this obsessive documentation was something extraordinary: a comprehensive understanding of German armored doctrine that rivaled what professional intelligence officers possessed. Thompson discovered that German excellence came from standardization, but standardization also created predictability. German tank crews moved in formation patterns that were taught at specific schools, using techniques refined through years of combat experience. Panzer commanders positioned their vehicles according to field manuals that emphasized maximum firepower and mutual support. These weren't random decisions, they were systematic applications of proven doctrine. Thompson learned to read German formations like sheet music. A Tiger tank at the front meant they expected heavy resistance and were prepared to punch through defensive positions. Panzer IVs in supporting positions indicated they planned to exploit any breakthrough the Tiger created. Half-tracks positioned in the middle of the column meant they were carrying assault troops for immediate follow-up operations. But standardization had a weakness that Thompson's analytical mind exploited ruthlessly. If you understood the system, you could predict not just what German units would do, but how they would respond when the system broke down. German tactical doctrine emphasized maintaining formation integrity under pressure. When attacked, German crews were trained to maintain mutual support, coordinate their responses, and preserve unit cohesion. This made them extremely effective against conventional attacks, but it also made them vulnerable to unconventional disruption. Thompson realized that German formations were like complex machinery, efficient and powerful when operating as designed, but catastrophically vulnerable when key components failed. If you could identify the critical stress points and attack them in the right sequence, you could cause systematic collapse rather than just localized damage. This insight transformed Thompson's approach to gunnery from destruction to disruption. Instead of trying to kill enemy tanks through brute force, he began thinking about how to break enemy systems through precision targeting. Not every shot had to destroy a vehicle. Some shots just needed to create problems that would cascade through the entire formation. Thompson studied German logistics patterns and discovered something that would prove crucial in Belgium. German armored columns relied on tight spacing to maintain communication and mutual support, but tight spacing also meant that disabled vehicles could create devastating bottlenecks. A single well-placed shot could transform an entire column into a stationary target. Even more importantly, Thompson understood German psychology. German crews were trained to respond to overwhelming force with coordinated withdrawal, but they weren't prepared for surgical disruption that suggested superior tactical intelligence. When German formations encountered precision attacks that demonstrated detailed knowledge of their doctrine, their confidence collapsed. Thompson's notebook contained more than technical specifications, it contained behavioral patterns. He knew how long German crews took to assess threats, how they communicated under pressure, and what types of attacks triggered panic versus organized resistance. This wasn't just military intelligence, it was psychological warfare conducted through mathematics. By December 1944, Thompson had developed something unprecedented, a systematic method for defeating German armor through analytical precision rather than superior firepower. He could look at any German formation and identify the sequence of shots that would cause maximum disruption with minimum expenditure of ammunition. This knowledge made Thompson extremely valuable to his unit, but it also made him dangerous to military hierarchy. His analytical approach sometimes produced conclusions that contradicted official doctrine or challenged decisions made by superior officers who lacked his battlefield experience. Thompson's commanders valued his technical skills, but they didn't fully understand his tactical insights. They saw him as an excellent gunner who could hit difficult targets, not as a strategic thinker who could deconstruct enemy doctrine and exploit systematic vulnerabilities. That gap in understanding would soon become critical, because Thompson was about to face a situation where his analytical insights were more valuable than his superior officer's strategic authority. December 19, 1944. The Ardennes forest had become a frozen hell where death moved on steel treads and spoke in the roar of tank engines. Through the fog and falling snow, Ray Thompson watched the approach of what military historians would later call a textbook armored exploitation force. 12 German vehicles moving with the confidence of predators who believed their prey was already defeated. The German column commander had every reason for confidence. Intelligence reports indicated American forces in this sector were scattered, demoralized, and operating without effective coordination. The surprise German offensive had shattered Allied defensive positions, and American units were retreating or surrendering across a 100-mile front. From the German perspective, this was a standard exploitation mission: punch through weak defensive positions, seize the Noville crossroads, and complete the encirclement of American forces trapped in Bastogne. The mission was so routine that the column commander hadn't even requested additional reconnaissance or air support. Leading the formation was a Tiger I tank, its 88mm gun capable of destroying any American armor at ranges exceeding 2 miles. The crew inside felt invincible, protected by armor that American weapons typically couldn't penetrate. Behind the Tiger, 3 Panzer IV tanks provided supporting firepower and battlefield flexibility. The middle section of the column contained 2 half-tracks packed with experienced infantry, assault troops trained to exploit tank breakthroughs by seizing key terrain and eliminating remaining resistance. These weren't green recruits. They were veterans who had fought across Russia and France, men who understood urban warfare and knew how to coordinate with armor in complex operations. Supporting vehicles brought up the rear ammunition trucks, fuel tankers, and maintenance equipment necessary for sustained operations. Even a mobile field kitchen followed the column, evidence of German confidence that this would be a methodical advance rather than a desperate assault. The road they had chosen seemed perfect for their mission. Narrow enough to provide concealment from air attack, but wide enough for armored movement. The steep forest banks on either side offered protection from flanking attacks, while the straight trajectory allowed maximum speed toward their objective. What the German commander didn't know was that his perfect road was actually a tactical nightmare waiting to happen. The same features that provided security also created vulnerability: no room to maneuver, no space to disperse, no escape routes if something went wrong. Thompson could see all of this through his periscope, but he could also see something the German commander couldn't: the mathematical relationship between vehicle spacing, road width, and vulnerability to sequential targeting. The German formation was a textbook example of efficient tactical movement, but it was also a perfect demonstration of how efficiency could become catastrophic weakness. The weather conditions that favored German concealment also favored Thompson's defensive position. Fog and snow limited visibility, making it difficult for German crews to identify the source of incoming fire. The same atmospheric conditions that helped the German advance would mask Thompson's muzzle flashes and complicate enemy counter-battery fire. Thompson watched the column approach with the calm focus of an engineer examining a mechanical problem. He calculated range, wind speed, target spacing, and firing sequences. His radio remained silent: no contact with command, no orders incoming, no permission to engage. The German vehicles continued their methodical advance, maintaining perfect formation discipline. In approximately 3 minutes they would reach the optimal firing range. In approximately 8 minutes, they would pass beyond Thompson's effective engagement zone and disappear into the forest where they could scatter and become unstoppable. Thompson had less than 3 minutes to decide whether to obey orders or save thousands of American lives. The moment of truth arrived with mathematical precision. Range, 800 yards. Wind speed, minimal. Target spacing, perfect for sequential disruption. Radio contact, still dead. Time remaining before German escape, 180 seconds. Ray Thompson made his decision with the same calm calculation he had once used to repair broken tractor engines. This wasn't emotional. This wasn't heroic. This was engineering applied to warfare, and the engineering solution was clear: initiate controlled collapse of enemy formation through precision sequential targeting. But Thompson's first shot violated every principle of conventional tank gunnery. Instead of targeting the lead Tiger tank, the most dangerous threat, he aimed for the third vehicle in the column, a Panzer IV positioned exactly where his calculations indicated maximum disruption would occur. The armor-piercing shell left Thompson's M10 Wolverine with a thunderous roar that shattered the forest silence. The round struck the Panzer IV directly in the flank, penetrating the side armor and detonating the internal ammunition storage. The explosion sent a pillar of fire and black smoke into the gray morning sky. The entire German column halted instantly. Radio chatter erupted across their communication channels as crews tried to understand what had happened. The lead Tiger began rotating its turret, searching for targets, but the explosion had created a smoke screen that obscured potential firing positions. Thompson didn't pause to admire his handiwork. As his loader rammed the next shell into the breach, Thompson shifted position slightly, just 5 yards to the left, enough to confuse German gunners trying to locate his muzzle flash. Then he fired again. His second shot targeted the sixth vehicle in the column, a half-track carrying infantry and positioned exactly where it would create maximum traffic disruption. The explosion was different this time, not the sharp crack of armor penetration, but the rolling thunder of fuel ignition. The half-track's gas tank detonated, spreading flames across the road surface and into the surrounding trees. Now the German column faced a tactical nightmare. The third vehicle was burning wreckage that blocked forward movement. The sixth vehicle was a flaming obstacle that prevented backward movement. They were trapped in a killing zone with no room to maneuver and no clear identification of their attacker. Thompson's third shot demonstrated the full sophistication of his tactical analysis. He targeted the eighth vehicle, a fuel truck positioned near the rear of the column. The mathematics were elegant. Fuel trucks carried enough combustible material to create massive explosions, and rear-position targets would prevent German retreat while creating psychological pressure on crews trapped in the middle. The fuel truck explosion was apocalyptic. Flames jetted skyward like a volcanic eruption, the blast wave knocking nearby infantry to the ground and setting fire to trees on both sides of the road. The explosion was so violent it could be heard miles away, suggesting to German crews that they faced a major American artillery bombardment. But the real genius of Thompson's firing pattern wasn't just the targeting sequence, it was the psychological warfare embedded in his tactical choices. Each shot demonstrated intimate knowledge of German doctrine and precise understanding of formation vulnerabilities. This wasn't random destruction, this was surgical dismantlement of their tactical system. German crews began firing wildly into the forest, their machine gunners riddling empty trees and snow banks. They were shooting at ghosts, confused by smoke and flames, unable to identify Thompson's actual position. Radio discipline collapsed as panicked voices filled the communication channels with contradictory reports and desperate requests for support. Thompson continued his methodical destruction, moving position after each shot to maintain the illusion of multiple attackers. His fourth shell struck another half-track attempting to reverse away from the flames. His fifth found the Tiger tank at exactly the moment when its crew exposed the vehicle's side armor while trying to pivot away from perceived threats. The Tiger's destruction was the psychological breaking point. German doctrine emphasized the invincibility of Tiger tanks. If the Tiger could be destroyed, then no German vehicle was safe. Surviving crews began abandoning their positions, fleeing into the forest on foot rather than remaining trapped in steel coffins. Within 20 minutes, Thompson had transformed a confident German exploitation force into burning wreckage scattered across a forest road. 7 vehicles completely destroyed, 4 more disabled, and the survivors retreating in panic toward their own lines. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Thompson's engagement wasn't the destruction he caused, it was what he didn't do. 0 American casualties. No friendly fire incidents. No revealed positions that would compromise future operations. He had achieved decisive tactical victory while violating direct orders, and he had done it with the precision of a mathematical proof. Thompson sat in his M10, hands steady, watching smoke rise from the wreckage of his unauthorized engagement. He had just demonstrated that sometimes the greatest act of military discipline is knowing exactly when to ignore military discipline. The German column was finished. The Noville crossroads remained in American hands. The 101st Airborne's lifeline stayed open. But Thompson's real battle was just beginning, because now he had to face his own command structure and justify the most successful unauthorized engagement in modern military history. From inside their burning vehicles, the German survivors experienced something that military psychologists would later study as tactical dissolution. The complete collapse of unit cohesion under conditions that defied their understanding of battlefield reality. Lieutenant Klaus Weber, commanding the lead Tiger tank, had fought across Russia, France and Belgium. He had survived Stalingrad, Kursk and Normandy. But nothing in his combat experience had prepared him for what happened on that forest road outside Noville. Weber's initial assumption was logical. His column had stumbled into a carefully prepared American ambush involving multiple tank destroyers positioned at different elevations. The precision of the incoming fire, the sophisticated targeting sequence, and the perfect timing all suggested professional planning by experienced American armor officers. But as Weber tried to coordinate his unit's response, the evidence didn't match his assumptions. American tank destroyers typically revealed their positions through muzzle flash patterns, but Weber's crew couldn't identify consistent firing points. The attacks seemed to come from different angles, yet the terrain didn't support multiple hidden positions. Even more confusing was the tactical sophistication of the American targeting choices. The enemy gunners weren't just destroying German vehicles, they were demonstrating detailed knowledge of German doctrine, hitting exactly the vehicles that would cause maximum formation disruption. This suggested intelligence preparation that went far beyond typical American capabilities. Weber radioed for artillery support, but his position reports were inconsistent because he couldn't locate the American firing positions. His requests for air reconnaissance were denied because the weather prevented flight operations. His appeals for reinforcement were rejected because higher command assumed his reports were exaggerated panic from inexperienced crews. Inside the burning half-tracks, German infantry faced an even worse psychological crisis. They had been trained to coordinate with armor in complex operations, but their supporting tanks were being systematically destroyed by an enemy they couldn't see or fight back against. Their tactical manual provided no guidance for this situation. Sergeant Hans Kruger, a veteran of the Russian campaign, later described the engagement as fighting against mathematics. The American fire wasn't random or emotional, it followed patterns that suggested inhuman calculation. Each shot seemed designed not just to kill Germans, but to demonstrate American tactical superiority. The psychological impact was devastating precisely because it contradicted German assumptions about American military competence. German doctrine taught that Americans relied on superior numbers and industrial capacity, not tactical sophistication. But Thompson's engagement suggested American crews who understood German vulnerabilities better than German commanders understood them. As the forest road filled with smoke and flames, surviving German crews began reporting contact with phantom American units. Some claimed to see multiple tank destroyers maneuvering through the trees. Others reported artillery observers directing fire from elevated positions. A few insisted they had identified American infantry teams coordinating the attack. These weren't cowardly fabrications, they were psychological attempts to explain the unexplainable. The human mind struggles with randomness and precision combined, especially under life-threatening stress. When German crews couldn't identify their attackers, their brains invented explanations that felt more manageable than the terrifying reality. The truth, that a single American gunner was destroying their entire formation through superior analytical thinking, was literally unthinkable within German tactical doctrine. Their training assumed that American soldiers were brave but unsophisticated, capable of determined resistance but not tactical innovation. By the time surviving German vehicles began their retreat, Weber's radio reports described contact with a full American battery, supported by coordinated infantry operations. Higher command received these reports as confirmation that American forces were more organized and effective than intelligence had indicated. The psychological warfare extended beyond the immediate battle. German officers analyzing Weber's after-action reports concluded that American tank destroyer doctrine had evolved beyond previous estimates. They began preparing defensive measures against American tactical innovations that didn't actually exist. Thompson had achieved something extraordinary. He had convinced an entire German tactical system that American forces possessed capabilities they didn't actually have. His unauthorized engagement became proof of American tactical sophistication that influenced German strategic planning for weeks afterward. The forest road outside Noville became a monument to the power of precision over force, intelligence over firepower, and individual initiative over institutional authority. But for the German survivors limping back toward their own lines, it became something else, evidence that the war had fundamentally changed and not in Germany's favor. The silence after combat is always the longest silence. Ray Thompson sat inside his M10 Wolverine, hands still gripping the firing controls, watching black smoke rise from the wreckage of 12 German vehicles scattered across the forest road like broken toys. His loader broke the quiet first. "Ray," he said, his voice hoarse from shouting coordinates during the engagement. "Are we going to get court-martialed for this?" Thompson didn't answer immediately. He was calculating not firing solutions this time but consequences. Military justice moved with mechanical precision just like everything else in the army. Unauthorized engagement of enemy forces was a court-martial offense that could result in anything from reduction in rank to execution, depending on the circumstances and the mood of the reviewing officers. The radio crackled back to life just as Thompson began his mental inventory of potential charges. Disobedience of direct orders. Unauthorized use of military equipment. Endangering unit security by revealing positions. The list could go on for pages, and each charge carried the potential for years in military prison. Captain Langston's voice came through the static, demanding an immediate status report. Thompson keyed the microphone and delivered the most understated battlefield summary in military history. Engaged enemy armored column. 12 vehicles destroyed or disabled. American casualties, 0. The radio went silent. Then Langston's voice returned, tight with disbelief. "Say again, Thompson. Did you say 12 vehicles?" "Confirmed, sir. Road is clear. Enemy force eliminated." Thompson could almost hear his commanding officer's mind working through the implications. 12 German vehicles didn't get destroyed by accident. That kind of result required either massive firepower or extraordinary tactical execution. Since Thompson's unit consisted of one tank destroyer with a 3-man crew, the mathematics pointed toward only one conclusion. When Thompson returned to battalion headquarters 3 hours later, he found Captain Langston sitting behind a field desk covered with maps, radio transcripts, and a single sheet of paper that would determine Thompson's future, his after-action report. Langston looked up as Thompson entered the tent. "Sit down, Private. We need to discuss what happened out there." Thompson sat, his notebook clutched in his hands like evidence that might either save or condemn him. He had documented everything: range calculations, firing sequences, target selection rationale, damage assessment. If they court-martialed him, at least the record would be complete. "You understand," Langston said, "that you had no authorization to engage those vehicles?" "Yes, sir." "You understand that your orders were to observe and report?" "Yes, sir." "You understand that your actions violated direct commands from this headquarters?" Thompson looked up. "Yes, sir. But I also understood that those tanks were heading toward Noville, and if they reached the crossroads, the 101st Airborne would be cut off completely." Langston stared at him for a long moment. Then he picked up Thompson's after-action report and read it again, studying the tactical diagrams and mathematical calculations that documented the most successful unauthorized engagement in recent military history. "Thompson," Langston said finally, "if this had gone wrong, if even one of those vehicles had been friendly fire, you'd be facing a firing squad." Thompson nodded. He had calculated that risk too. "But it didn't go wrong," Langston continued. "It went perfectly. So perfectly that I'm not sure whether to recommend you for a medal or a court-martial. The answer to that question would determine not just Thompson's fate, but the future of American tactical doctrine. Military institutions have a complicated relationship with rule-breaking. They depend on discipline and obedience for basic function, but they also depend on tactical innovation for survival. Ray Thompson's unauthorized engagement forced the U.S. Army to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the most disciplined action is to ignore discipline entirely. The investigation into Thompson's actions began within hours of his return to headquarters. Division intelligence officers interviewed his crew members, analyzed the wreckage patterns, and attempted to reconstruct the tactical situation that had led to his decision to fire without orders. What they discovered challenged fundamental assumptions about battlefield decision-making. Thompson's engagement wasn't the result of panic, aggression, or battlefield confusion. It was the product of systematic analysis, mathematical calculation, and tactical reasoning that exceeded the sophistication of official doctrine. Intelligence officers found themselves studying Thompson's field notebook with the intensity typically reserved for captured enemy documents. His sketches of German vehicle vulnerabilities were more detailed than official recognition manuals. His tactical diagrams demonstrated understanding of enemy doctrine that rivaled professional intelligence estimates. Most remarkably, Thompson's firing sequence revealed a level of tactical thinking that suggested individual soldiers might be capable of strategic analysis previously assumed to require staff-level coordination. He had identified systematic vulnerabilities in German armor doctrine and exploited them through precision targeting that achieved strategic objectives with minimal resource expenditure. The mathematical elegance of Thompson's engagement couldn't be ignored. 7 enemy vehicles destroyed, 4 disabled, 0 American casualties, and a vital crossroads held, all accomplished by a single gunner operating without orders, support, or backup. The efficiency ratio was unprecedented in tank destroyer operations. But the implications went beyond tactical success. Thompson had demonstrated that rigid adherence to communication protocols might actually inhibit optimal battlefield performance. His inability to contact higher command hadn't prevented effective action. It had enabled it by forcing him to rely on direct tactical analysis rather than distant strategic guidance. Division commanders faced an uncomfortable choice. They could court-martial Thompson for disobedience and maintain traditional command authority, or they could study his methods and potentially revolutionize American tactical doctrine. The decision would define how the U.S. Army adapted to modern warfare's increasing pace and complexity. The choice became easier when intelligence reports confirmed the strategic impact of Thompson's engagement. The German column he destroyed had been part of a larger operation designed to complete the encirclement of American forces in Bastogne. By holding the Noville crossroads, Thompson had preserved the supply lifeline that enabled the 101st Airborne's eventual relief. Instead of court-martial proceedings, Thompson found himself assigned to the U.S. Army Artillery School at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where his tactical methods were analyzed, documented, and incorporated into advanced gunnery training. His unauthorized firing pattern became the foundation for what military educators termed asymmetrical engagement sequencing. The concept was revolutionary. Instead of attempting to destroy enemy formations through superior firepower, American crews could achieve tactical victory through systematic disruption of enemy tactical systems. Thompson's mathematical approach to target selection became standard curriculum for tank destroyer crews preparing for operations against Soviet armor in Europe. Military theorists recognized that Thompson's innovation represented something larger than tactical technique. It demonstrated the potential for individual initiative to solve problems that institutional authority couldn't address. His engagement became a case study in adaptive leadership, taught to officer candidates as an example of when subordinates must exceed their orders to accomplish their mission. Years later, former German officers interviewed about the war would consistently mention American tactical unpredictability as a decisive factor in their defeat. They had prepared for American industrial superiority and numerical advantages, but not for American analytical innovation that turned German tactical strengths into systematic vulnerabilities. Thompson's notebook sketches and tactical diagrams were declassified in 1965 and became required reading for NATO tank crews training to counter Soviet armored doctrine. His mathematical approach to battlefield geometry influenced everything from tank positioning to artillery targeting throughout the Cold War era. The Army never officially acknowledged that Thompson had violated direct orders. Instead, they classified his engagement as adaptive tactical response under degraded communication conditions, military bureaucracy's way of saying that sometimes the right thing and the legal thing aren't the same thing. Thompson had proved that individual analytical thinking could achieve strategic objectives that institutional coordination couldn't accomplish. His unauthorized engagement became authorized doctrine, proving that the greatest military innovations often begin with someone brave enough to break the rules. Ray Thompson returned to Kansas in 1946, carrying a Bronze Star he never talked about and tactical knowledge that had revolutionized American armor doctrine. He married Helen, a schoolteacher from the next county over, and opened a small repair shop on the outskirts of Dodge City where he spent the next 40 years fixing tractors, building grain elevators, and teaching his son geometry by drawing angles in the prairie dirt. He never called himself a hero. When local newspapers tried to interview him about his war service, Thompson would redirect the conversation toward mechanical engineering or farming techniques. He treated his military experience like any other job, something he had done competently and professionally, but not something that defined his identity. The closest Thompson ever came to explaining his actions was in a conversation with a military historian who tracked him down in 1987. When asked why he had chosen to fire without orders, Thompson replied with characteristic precision, "Because by the time the radio worked, it would have been too late." That answer captured the essence of Thompson's philosophy, that rules exist to serve objectives, not to replace thinking. He hadn't broken military discipline. He had applied it at a level his superiors couldn't see. His unauthorized engagement wasn't rebellion against authority, it was the ultimate expression of military professionalism. Thompson understood something that bureaucratic systems often forget, that the purpose of discipline is to enable effective action, not to prevent it. When following orders would have resulted in mission failure, the most disciplined response was to exceed those orders in service of the larger objective. His legacy lives on in military training programs that teach adaptive leadership, tactical innovation, and individual initiative within institutional frameworks. Every tank crew that learns sequential targeting, every officer who studies battlefield geometry, every soldier trained to think analytically about tactical problems carries forward Thompson's example. Ray Thompson proved that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers mathematical calculations. Sometimes it draws diagrams in a spiral notebook. Sometimes it pulls a trigger not out of aggression, but out of analytical certainty that action is necessary. He reminded the world that the greatest heroes are often the quietest ones, the people who do what must be done, not because they seek recognition, but because their understanding of the situation demands nothing less than precision, timing, and the moral courage to act when action is required. One gunner. One decision. One perfect pattern. And an entire German column brought to its knees by mathematics, determination, and the knowledge that sometimes the most disciplined thing you can do is break discipline itself.